Airline staff harass black woman, 7 minutes later she cancels their biggest contract. Imagine stepping into a space designed for comfort and exclusivity, only to be met with humiliation and judgment. A poised and accomplished black woman as she walked into the airport's premium lounge. Instead of receiving the respect her qualifications deserved, she was subjected to stares, whispers, and veiled insults from the very staff who served her. What the lounge staff didn't realize was that she was no ordinary traveler. She was someone with the power to completely change the story. In just 7 minutes, she took decisive action that not only impacted the airline, but also sparked a movement for change. This story isn't just about standing up against discrimination. It's also about courage, resilience, and using your influence to demand better things. How did she turn an experience of bias into a catalyst for justice? Stay tuned, because this is a story you won't want to miss. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories that uncover truths, celebrate triumphs, and spark meaningful conversations, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives with a global audience. Now, let's jump right into this unforgettable story of justice and transformation. Alexis Johnson was no stranger to success. As the CEO of a rapidly growing logistics firm, she was accustomed to navigating high-pressure environments with grace and confidence. Her years of hard work had earned her access to exclusive spaces, including the premium lounges at some of the world's busiest airports. It was in one of these lounges that her character and resilience would be put to the ultimate test. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that spoke of professionalism and elegance, Alexis stepped through the sleek glass doors of the lounge. The soft hum of quiet conversations, the faint clinking of glassware, and the muted announcements from distant speakers created an air of sophistication. Polished marble floors gleamed under the glow of carefully curated lighting, and silver accents added to the luxurious ambiance. Despite the engineered comfort, Alexis couldn't ignore the subtle shift in energy when she entered. A few heads turned, and murmurs rippled through the room. It wasn't the first time she had encountered such reactions, but each instance still carried the sting of prejudice. Her calm composure never wavered as she adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase and made her way toward the counter. A young man in a pressed uniform approached her, clipboard in hand. His smile seemed polite, but Alexis could sense the hesitation in his demeanor. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "May I see your boarding pass and membership card?" With a practiced grace, Alexis retrieved the requested documents from her briefcase and handed them over. The man's eyes flicked to the card, his brow furrowing slightly. "One moment, please," he murmured, before retreating to the back office. As Alexis stood in the middle of the lounge, she could feel the weight of judgmental glances. A group of patrons nearby whispered among themselves, their furtive looks leaving no doubt about the nature of their conversation. Determined to maintain her dignity, Alexis straightened her shoulders and waited. Moments later, a woman in a red blazer emerged from the back. Her name tag read Heather, and her expression carried a mix of authority and skepticism. Holding up Alexis's membership card, Heather's tone was dripping with condescension as she asked, "Are you aware this is a priority lounge?" What followed was a series of exchanges that would reveal the deep-rooted biases Alexis had encountered before. But this time, the staff had underestimated her resolve. The storm brewing was about to engulf them in ways they could never have imagined. Heather's question hung in the air, a thinly veiled challenge wrapped in feigned professionalism. Alexis met her gaze, her expression calm but resolute. "Yes, I am aware," she replied, her tone even and composed. "I've been a priority member for over 5 years." Heather's lips tightened into a forced smile as she examined Alexis's membership card. "I see," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "However, we've had issues recently with unauthorized use of these cards. I'll need to verify this in our system." The insinuation was clear. Alexis had encountered enough discrimination in her career to recognize it instantly. She straightened her posture and replied, "If you're implying this card doesn't belong to me, I assure you it does. Feel free to take the time you need to confirm it." Heather raised an eyebrow but said nothing, retreating to the back counter with the card in hand. Alexis could feel the lounge's attention fixating on her. Whispers grew louder, and curious eyes darted in her direction. A couple seated nearby exchanged knowing glances, one of them muttering, "She probably saved for months just to get in here." Their quiet laughter was sharp, cutting through the polished atmosphere of the room. Alexis's grip tightened on the handle of her briefcase, but her expression remained neutral. Years of navigating spaces where she was underestimated had taught her the importance of poise. However, this situation felt different. It wasn't just the assumptions being made about her. It was the blatant disrespect wrapped in false professionalism. After several minutes, Heather returned, her expression smug. "Well, Ms. Johnson," she said, her voice carrying an edge of satisfaction. "Everything checks out. However, I must remind you that priority members are expected to adhere to a certain standard of decorum while in the lounge." Alexis tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. "And what standard might that be?" she asked, her voice cool and measured. Heather smiled, a sharp, performative gesture. "Let's just say we expect a level of refinement that reflects the exclusivity of this space." The insult was clear, though unspoken. Alexis considered her response carefully, taking a slow breath before replying. "Thank you for clarifying," she said, her tone polite but firm. "I'll be sure to maintain your expected level of refinement." Heather blinked, momentarily caught off guard by Alexis's calm demeanor. She opened her mouth to speak, but Alexis had already turned away, walking toward a seat in the corner of the lounge. She placed her briefcase on the table and pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen as she processed the situation. This wasn't the first time Alexis had been subjected to thinly veiled insults or outright prejudice, but as she glanced around the room, taking in the smug faces and judgmental stares, a quiet determination settled over her. She wouldn't let this pass without consequences. Dialing a number from her contact list, Alexis pressed the phone to her ear. "This is Alexis Johnson," she said, her voice low but firm. "We need to talk about the contract with Skyline Air. There's been an incident." On the other end of the line, her business associate immediately recognized the gravity of her tone. "Understood," he replied. "What do you want to do?" Alexis glanced toward the counter, where Heather was chatting with another staff member, laughing quietly, as if nothing had happened. Her voice hardened. "I want them to feel the full weight of their actions. No half measures. This is unacceptable." She ended the call, her hand lingering on the phone for a moment. Around her, the lounge continued its polished hum, but the tension was palpable. Heather and the other staff remained oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond their understanding. Minutes later, the atmosphere in the lounge shifted again as Edward Langston, Skyline Air's regional director, strode through the doors. His imposing presence silenced the room, and heads turned as he scanned the space. Heather's confident demeanor faltered as her eyes landed on him, her face going pale. Edward approached Alexis's table, his expression softening slightly when he addressed her. "Miss Johnson, I understand there's been an issue. May I have a moment of your time?" Alexis stood, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. "Certainly," she replied. "Let's discuss how this situation represents not just a lapse in service, but a systemic failure in how your company treats its valued customers." The weight of her words settled over Edward and the room. What had begun as an uncomfortable encounter was now unraveling into something much larger, an impending reckoning for Skyline Air. The staff's earlier bravado had dissolved into nervous silence as they realized the gravity of the situation. Alexis was no longer just a customer. She was their wake-up call. The tension in the lounge was almost tangible as Alexis ended her phone call, her expression resolute. She returned her phone to her briefcase and folded her hands on the table, her calm demeanor concealing the storm she had just set in motion. Around her, the polished hum of the lounge continued a stark contrast to the brewing fallout that would soon disrupt the air of exclusivity. Heather remained behind the counter, her smugness undiminished as she whispered to a junior staff member. Their quiet laughter echoed faintly, but Alexis remained unshaken. Her resolve wasn't fueled by anger, but by a determination to hold Skyline Air accountable for their blatant disrespect and prejudice. Minutes later, the sleek glass doors of the lounge slid open, and the room's atmosphere shifted instantly. Edward Langston, Skyline Air's regional director, entered with purposeful strides. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor, Edward's reputation as a leader who tolerated no failures preceded him. His sharp eyes scanned the room, landing first on Heather, whose face drained of color, and then on Alexis, whose composed gaze met his unflinchingly. "Ms. Johnson," Edward began as he approached her table. His tone was professional, though tinged with an undercurrent of urgency. "I understand there's been a situation. May I have a moment to address it with you?" Alexis stood, adjusting the strap of her briefcase as she gestured toward a nearby seating area. "Of course, Mr. Langston," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "Let's discuss what's happened and, more importantly, the implications for your company." Heather and the other staff exchanged nervous glances as Edward followed Alexis to a quieter corner of the lounge. The murmurs of nearby patrons faded as the two sat across from each other, the weight of the moment palpable. "Mrs. Johnson," Edward began, his voice measured, "let me first apologize on behalf of Skyline Air for any inconvenience you may have experienced. We take these matters very seriously." Alexis tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "An inconvenience, Mr. Langston?" she said, her tone sharper now. "This was far more than that. Your staff questioned the legitimacy of my credentials, insinuated that I didn't belong here, and wrapped their prejudice in a thin veneer of protocol. This wasn't just poor service, it was a systemic failure." Edward's brow furrowed, and he leaned forward slightly. "I assure you, Ms. Johnson, we will investigate this thoroughly. Steps will be taken to ensure it doesn't happen again." Alexis nodded but didn't back down. "Steps?" she repeated, her voice carrying an edge of steel. "Mr. Langston, do you know who I am?" Edward hesitated, his gaze flickering to her briefcase, then back to her unwavering eyes. "I believe I do, ma'am," he said cautiously. "Then you're aware," Alexis continued, "that my company has a significant contract with Skyline Air, a partnership valued at millions annually, a partnership built on the assumption that Skyline Air operates with the utmost professionalism and inclusivity." Edward's posture stiffened, and a shadow of concern crossed his face. "Ms. Johnson, please understand that this incident does not reflect our company's values. We will address this matter immediately." Alexis leaned back in her chair, her expression calm but resolute. "Addressing the matter isn't enough, Mr. Langston. My clients trust me to align with businesses that reflect our values of respect and integrity. Skyline Air has failed on both counts. Effective immediately, I am terminating our contract." Edward's face paled, and the weight of her words settled heavily on his shoulders. "Ms. Johnson," he began, his voice quieter now, "please reconsider. This partnership is vital to both our organizations. We value your business immensely." Alexis held his gaze, her tone unwavering. If Skyline Air truly values its clients, it would have ensured that situations like this never occurred. Your staff's behavior reflects a culture that tolerates discrimination, and that is unacceptable. My decision is final." Across the room, Heather and the other staff watched the exchange with growing dread. The realization that Alexis held the power to disrupt their carefully curated world was sinking in. Edward exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the situation. "I understand, Ms. Johnson," he said finally, his voice subdued. "On behalf of Skyline Air, I extend my deepest apologies and assure you that we will take immediate action to rectify this." Alexis stood, extending her hand to him. "Thank you for your apology, Mr. Langston. I hope your company learns from this experience." The handshake was brief, and as Alexis turned to leave the lounge, the room seemed to hold its breath. Her calm composure had not only dismantled their prejudice, but also sent a clear message: actions have consequences. As the lounge doors closed behind her, Alexis stepped into the cool evening air, feeling a quiet sense of triumph. The storm had passed, but for Skyline Air, the fallout was just beginning. In a single decisive moment, Alexis had turned an experience of injustice into a reckoning that would ripple far beyond that lounge. The story of Alexis Johnson's encounter at Skyline Air's Priority Lounge spread like wildfire. Within hours of her departure, the incident was trending on social media, with hashtags like Skyline Discrimination and Justice for Alexis dominating conversations. Passengers from around the world shared their own experiences of bias and poor treatment by the airline, painting a troubling picture of a company failing to uphold its promises of inclusivity and respect. Major news outlets picked up the story, framing Alexis as a poised and determined businesswoman who stood up against systemic prejudice. Her decision to terminate a multi-million-dollar contract with Skyline Air was seen as a bold statement against corporate complacency. The headlines were unrelenting. Airline faces backlash after executives' lounge experience sparks outrage. Discrimination in the skies, a businesswoman's stand against injustice, and Skyline Air's Priority Lounge controversy when bias costs millions. The backlash was swift and severe. Within 24 hours, Skyline Air's social media pages were flooded with comments demanding accountability. Customers threatened boycotts, and influencers who had partnered with the airline publicly severed ties. Stocks began to dip as investors grew wary of the reputational damage. In response to the mounting pressure, Skyline Air released an official statement apologizing to Alexis and acknowledging the need for change. The statement read, in part, "We deeply regret the incident involving Ms. Alexis Johnson and recognize that it reflects broader issues within our organization. Skyline Air is committed to addressing these failures to ensure that all customers feel valued and respected. Effective immediately, we are implementing measures to prevent such incidents in the future." However, the public wasn't satisfied with vague promises. Calls for transparency and concrete actions grew louder. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Skyline Air announced a series of sweeping reforms. These included 1. Mandatory bias training. All employees, from entry-level staff to top executives, were required to complete comprehensive training on unconscious bias and customer inclusivity. 2. Zero-tolerance policy. A new policy was introduced, ensuring that any employee found engaging in discriminatory behavior would face immediate termination. 3. Customer advocacy panel. The company established an independent panel to review customer complaints, ensuring greater accountability and transparency. 4. Increased representation. Skyline Air pledged to increase diversity within its leadership and frontline teams, committing to hiring practices that prioritize equity and inclusion. Despite these measures, the damage to Skyline Air's reputation was far-reaching. Major corporations reconsidered their partnerships, wary of being associated with a company embroiled in controversy. Travel bloggers and industry experts analyzed the incident, warning airlines about the financial and social consequences of failing to address systemic bias. For Alexis, the fallout was both a vindication of her stance and a reminder of the power of accountability. As the media frenzy continued, she found herself at the center of public admiration. Interviews and op-eds praised her courage, calling her a role model for standing up against injustice. But Alexis was quick to deflect the attention, emphasizing that her actions were about something much bigger than her own experience. In one televised interview, Alexis stated, "This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about the countless people who face these microaggressions and prejudices every day, often without the means or platform to fight back. We can't let this be just another viral moment. It needs to be a turning point." The ripple effects of the incident extended beyond Skyline Air. Other companies in the travel and hospitality industry began reassessing their policies, fearing they could be next to face public scrutiny. Several airlines announced their own initiatives to combat discrimination, hoping to avoid a similar PR disaster. Meanwhile, Alexis used the momentum to launch a broader conversation about systemic inequality. She partnered with advocacy organizations to develop workshops and resources for marginalized groups, empowering them to navigate and challenge discrimination in professional and personal spaces. Her company also introduced new policies, ensuring that all partnerships aligned with their values of inclusivity and respect. For Skyline Air, the fallout wasn't just reputational. The airline faced lawsuits from former employees and customers who came forward with stories of discrimination, emboldened by Alexis's example. Investigations revealed troubling patterns of bias and negligence, forcing Skyline Air to reckon with its long history of systemic failures. Months later, Skyline Air's CEO appeared on national television to address the controversy. "We failed our customers and our values," he admitted. "The incident with Ms. Johnson was a wake-up call, and we are determined to rebuild trust. Change won't happen overnight, but we are committed to doing better." Despite these efforts, the trust Skyline Air had lost would take years to regain. The incident served as a stark reminder to corporations everywhere: accountability is non-negotiable, and prejudice has no place in modern business. For Alexis, the experience was a catalyst for something much greater. As she reflected on the broader implications of the fallout, she knew that her decision to act had sparked a necessary shift. The journey wasn't over, but it was a step in the right direction, a step toward a world where everyone could walk into any space with confidence, dignity, and respect. Alexis Johnson's story didn't end with her decision to terminate Skyline Air's contract, or with the reforms the company hastily enacted. It became a symbol of what can be achieved when one person decides to stand against injustice, refusing to accept the status quo. Alexis transformed an incident of discrimination into a movement for accountability and inclusivity, inspiring countless others to take a stand in their own lives. Through her calm yet resolute actions, Alexis reminded us all of the power of dignity, resilience, and courage. She could have walked away from the lounge that day, accepting the treatment as yet another frustrating but inevitable moment of prejudice. Instead, she chose to confront it head-on, not just for herself but for everyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or devalued. Her decision to publicly challenge Skyline Air led to a cascade of changes not just within the airline, but across industries. It opened the door for meaningful conversations about systemic inequality and forced corporations to confront uncomfortable truths about their internal cultures. Alexis's insistence on accountability showed that meaningful change requires more than surface-level promises. It demands bold, decisive action and a commitment to doing better. But Alexis didn't stop there. She used the momentum to advocate for lasting change. Through partnerships with advocacy groups and initiatives designed to empower marginalized communities, she extended the impact of her actions far beyond the walls of the airport lounge. Her efforts became a blueprint for how individuals and organizations can work together to combat prejudice and create environments where everyone is treated with respect and dignity. As the public rallied behind her, Alexis made it clear that this wasn't just about her personal experience. "Prejudice is a systemic issue," she said in a widely shared interview. "It goes beyond one company or one industry. If we truly want to create a world where everyone is treated equally, we have to challenge these systems at every level. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's necessary." Her words struck a chord, inspiring others to reflect on their own biases and take action within their communities. From employees advocating for inclusivity at their workplaces to customers holding companies accountable for their practices, Alexis's story sparked a movement that went far beyond the confines of one incident. This story is more than just a lesson in courage, it's a call to action for each of us. Prejudice and discrimination thrive in silence and complacency. To create a world where dignity and respect are universal, we must challenge these injustices whenever and wherever they occur. Whether it's standing up for someone in a moment of need, calling out discriminatory practices, or pushing for systemic reforms, every action matters. So, what can you do? Start by sharing this story with others. Use it as a conversation starter to highlight the importance of treating everyone with fairness and respect. Challenge yourself to examine biases, both in others and within yourself, and encourage those around you to do the same. Support businesses and leaders who prioritize inclusivity and hold accountable those who don't. Small actions, when multiplied, can lead to significant change. If Alexis' story resonated with you, let it inspire you to take a stand in your own life. Speak up when you see injustice, even when it's uncomfortable. Advocate for those whose voices are often ignored. And, most importantly, believe in the power of one person to make a difference. The next time you find yourself in a moment of doubt, remember Alexis Johnson. Remember how she stood tall in the face of judgment, how she refused to let prejudice dictate her worth, and how she turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change. Let her story remind you that courage is contagious, and that your actions, no matter how small, can ripple outward to create a better, more equitable world. Alexis Johnson, a man for everything, an old school ally. Before we wrap up, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment of prejudice that needed to be challenged? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want this to be a space where we can learn from and inspire one another. If you found this story moving, please like this video, share it with your network, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that uncover truths, celebrate resilience, and ignite meaningful conversations. Together we can build a world where dignity and respect are more than just ideals. They are the foundation of every interaction. Thank you for watching, and let's continue to stand together against prejudice, one story at a time.